Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the National Museum of the Pacific Wars webinar series. My name is Jacqueline Mertz. I am the Museum Programs Coordinator here. And I wanted to also point out this wonderful picture that's behind me. This was a project that we did last week. It was Texas's spring break. And so I was hanging out in the lobby and having adults and children kind of add some stickers. And so this was like a sticker project that we did. Sort of like color by number, but sticker by letter. So I gave stickers, handed out stickers to them, and they put them on according to what letter was associated with that color, and eventually it became a picture of Rosie. So we're super excited for that. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our two wonderful speakers that are here with us today over at the Battleship New Jersey. We have Ryan Szimanski, who's the Vice President of Curatorial and Education, and Libby Jones, Director of Education. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us. So today we want to talk about the Battleship New Jersey and the Philadelphia Navy Yard where she was built and some of the people who built her. So for reference, she was built at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. She was built at the Philadelphia Navy Yard, and about 30% of all ships built during World War II were built at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. And part of the reason for such a large percentage of ships being built there is she's just in a great place for shipbuilding. She's just a little bit inland, so she's not as prone to getting hit by things. And we've got a lot of materials here in Pennsylvania. So think of all that Pennsylvania steel. All told, shipyard construction expands greatly as you might expect once the war starts. So the chart there just gives you a little bit of idea of where things are being built. By 1939, the Navy had to confront the uncomfortable truth that two of the nation's largest shipyards not only bulged with merchant work that left little physical space for naval work, but were also reluctant to bid for profit-limited warship contracts. So basically all that means is the private yards like the New York ship, where the Battleship is located today, didn't have space for them. So a lot of the major warships are being built in the government-run yards, like the Philadelphia Navy Yard. So it was February 1939 by the time that it was announced that the Battleship New Jersey was going to be built at Philadelphia. So up until that point, the Philadelphia Navy Yard had been doing a lot of construction, but after having lost a number of their ships during Pearl Harbor, including two destroyers, so Kaysen and Shaw, plus Oklahoma, Utah, Pennsylvania had all been modernized at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. Pearl Harbor had a major impact on what was happening there. So this is the Philadelphia Navy Yard itself. And during World War II, the shipyard had about 40,000 employees. At one point, it's going to grow over the years. We're going to talk about those numbers. All told, they built 53 ships. They repaired 574. So they worked with a lot of different types of vessels, and the Navy Yard worked with a lot more than just ships. So all told, they fabricated something like 500 aircraft. They degaussed, so they're making not magnetic, essentially about 700 different ships. They outfitted more than 600 because in addition to building ships at the Navy Yard, they're also doing work on ships built elsewhere. So a lot of different projects going on there, a lot of different places for a lot of different people to get involved. So this is a photo of some of the women looking to get some work at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. Gives you a little bit idea of the stats of the people who had been working in there. And all told, of their new hires, we end up with 9,000 out of 29,000 new hires being women at one point in the war. So it is a fair portion of them. About 1/3 of all World War II workers at the Philadelphia Navy Yard lived in New Jersey and take the ferry across. It's going to be one of the big issues for most everybody at the yard is that because it has expanded so greatly, there's not a lot of housing. There's not a lot of space for everybody. So the Navy Yard itself, not just the Philadelphia Navy Yard, but Navy Yards across the country are having to come up with interesting solutions to account for that. So one, they're building a lot more housing. But two, especially since they're their workforce is involving such a wider variety of people. Certain shipyards need things like daycare. Certain shipyards, Kaiser is famous for it, or having their own hospital on base, on their yard, which then makes them, that's the foundings of what is now Kaiser hospitals today. That's what's continued out of it, even if the Kaiser shipyard doesn't exist. So they're having to create new things that didn't otherwise have before. Retention is going to be a big issue here, though. Thousands of people just sort of walked off the job without notice every year. There was some reasoning for that. A 1942 inquiry was started about complaints of discriminatory practices, especially in regard to religious, racial, family connections. One of the Philadelphia Navy Yard solutions for that was to put female supervisors in their industrial shops. It's worth noting that large parts of the ships are constructed in shops as opposed to just going out and building the ship itself. And for the entire first year of New Jersey's construction, women weren't even allowed to work on the ship, only in the shops. So putting female supervisors in those industrial shops is going to make a difference. Also worth noting that at that point, about 16% of workers in those shops are female, about 29% of them aren't white. One of the other solutions, in addition to having women working in the shops, was to have POWs. Forrestal preferred having German and Italian prisoners of war than working in there, though there were plenty of others that had concerns about POWs in their shop. Generally, the POWs were taking jobs previously done by Black men. There was a lot of discussion about finding ways to fix that worker shortage. Norfolk had an interesting solution to that problem. They actually placed, in addition to help wanted ads and reaching out to high schools and sort of expected things, they created a living display in a shop window where female employees worked in the window and demonstrated work of what they would be doing in the yard in an attempt to entice people in. Because most of the workers who were coming in, female or otherwise, but especially the women, weren't really trained before they got there, they came up with something they called the Helper Trainee Program. So it combined classroom instruction, blueprint reading, trade theory, with practical shop floor training. So these unskilled hires received instructions as mechanic learners. It's a new employee category created during the war. It's intended to replenish the ranks of the handymen and helpers, which are traditionally the sort of lower ranking workers, and that had mostly been promoted out. So they needed sort of the entry level people. They enrolled a lot of female recruits. Philadelphia Navy Yard's 12,700 mechanic learners included more than 7,500 women, many of whom were described as being almost illiterate and had never worked under shop conditions before. So that's sort of the learning process that they had to go through. However, there was at least a few people who had some thoughts about the women who were working there. So Elizabeth Jennings was a Philadelphia Navy Yard personnel supervisor, and they were getting a lot of comments about the women who were suddenly working on these ships. And she says, the girls who invaded the ship, they know what to do with a hacksaw and shears. The cold penetrates their 6 layers of stockings and shirts and slacks, stiffens their fingers and toes. Dirt blackens their faces and eats into their pores. The fumes choke their throats and smart their eyes. But the girls can take it, and they do. This gives you a little idea of the working conditions that they're going through. All told, about 70% of female workers at the Navy Yard had some sort of clerical job or inside the shops, but women were permitted in almost anything but rigging. They even lowered height restrictions so they could get more female security guards. They're trying to put people into every job they can. All told, about 25% of the Naval Air Factory was women. And then in 1943, League Island, so it's a portion of what's happening there, hired 500 female welders. And by 1945, female welders made up half the deck construction crew of one of the carriers. So they're certainly having a strong presence there in the yard. Wasn't the safest job, though, as you can imagine. Many workers were killed. Notably, in one of the logs, we've got Margaret Hill. She's 45 years old, and she was killed when her neck and skull were crushed by a grinding machine. So not always the safest thing to do. But they also came up with some fun ways to boost morale. There was a girls' bowling league and women's softball, which the women's sports league seems to be just as much entertainment for the men as it was for the women. So it was good for morale for the whole yard. By the end of the war, the size of the U.S. Navy more than tripled, and the average time it took to build an aircraft carrier fell by half. So that's the amount of work that's happening in these yards and the sort of change over time. The three big yards, the Philadelphia Navy Yard, Brooklyn, and Norfolk, managed to deliver 10 battleships after 1940. It's more than the total combined completed by the British, the German, and Japanese shipyards. So they're building a whole lot of ships. One of them being Battleship New Jersey.
So now that we've looked at the generic what's going on at the Navy Yard, let's talk about the specifics of building a single ship. Battleship New Jersey displaces 57,500 tons when fully loaded. About 45,000 tons of that are made up of metals, steel, bronze, armor plating, all of these things that are core to the ship. The remaining roughly 10,000 tons is the supplies the men consume, the ammunition, parts that can be removed from the ship. Prior to World War II, it took about 4 years to build a battleship, and usually a year or two of designing prior to that. Battleship New Jersey was built in just 31 months between 1940 and 1943. Later battleships built here at the Philadelphia Navy Yard, including our sister ship Wisconsin, got that number down even lower into the high 20 months. Just to design a battleship like New Jersey with 1,600 rooms on it requires about 430,000 man days and 175 tons of blueprints. The museum doesn't even have a complete set of blueprints because there are so many thousands of these. Not all of them survived. The first major milestone in building a ship is laying the keel. From there, you start building up the frames and the sides of the ship. The ship has over 400,000 square feet of decks that need to be laid. She has 7 decks in the hull and another 12 decks in the superstructure above that. There's over 1,000 miles of shafting from the engines to the propellers, 80 miles of plumbing, and nearly 15,000 valves that go into the watertight fittings of the ship. The ship has over 800 doors. Those are typically things in walls, and 161 hatches. Those are openings in the deck. Also, 852 manholes, which are too small to be considered doors and hatches and generally include access to the spaces such as fuel tanks and things like that. So a total of over 1,800 openings to access the 1,600 rooms on the ship. After the keel has been laid and the hull is finished, the next major milestone is christening the ship. At this point, you start to put on the propellers, the weapons, and the superstructure. 15 miles of rigging will be added to fly the ship's signal flags. 250 miles of electrical cable will be run to operate the 900 motors the ship was built with. More than 100 have been added since the ship was originally constructed, and to operate the 5,300 light fixtures it takes to operate a ship. So you can start to see that a ship like this needs not only Rosie the riveters and Wendy the welders, but also plumbers, electricians, riggers, and other technical experts like this. This is not a job that's done by a bunch of amateurs following instructions. It is technical professionals that are required to build a ship like this. And at the end of the day, you have 1,100 phones to connect your 1,600 spaces. As the ship is completed, it will take 400,000 gallons of paint to cover her because the ship has over 7 million square feet of surface area. Another liquid it takes to build the ship is a single bottle of New Jersey white wine, which is used to christen the ship when she's launched and first put into the water. That is when the hull officially receives her name, Battleship New Jersey. All told, at the end of those 31 months, it took over 4 million man days to build the ship. Since about a third of the workforce was female after the first year, that's roughly 3 million man days and 1 million woman days to build the ship. Materials were contributed from 34 states. The shipyards tended to be in states near where all the things they needed were. So, for example, Battleship New Jersey, we had Bethlehem Steel in Pennsylvania to provide the armor, and Westinghouse to provide the engineering equipment. The Washington Navy Yard provided most of the guns. So those are all things that are relatively close to the Philadelphia area. It took over $200 million in 1940s money to build the ship. That's well over $2 billion today. At the end of the day, your Wendy the welders welded some 800 miles of weld lines together to attach the ship's plates, and your Rosie the riveters drove over 1 million rivets to hold the ship together. The ship was built at a period of transition between riveted hulls and welded hulls. While welding existed, it was not fully trusted yet. So Battleship New Jersey is one of a few ships built during this hybrid transition where rivets are used for parts of the ship that are supposed to be flexible as she's going over the waves, and weld lines are made for parts of the ship that are supposed to be rigid. We are about to celebrate the ship's 80th commissioning ceremony on May 23rd of this year. On May 23rd, 1943, the ship came to life when more than 2,700 crew members first stepped on board under the command of Captain Carl F. Holden. At that commissioning ceremony, dignitaries such as the Admiral in charge of the Atlantic Fleet and the Secretary of the Navy were present to officially welcome the battleship into service right here on the Philadelphia waterfront. Today, Battleship New Jersey has been operating as a museum for some 22 years, following a 50-year active service life with the Navy that went through World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Lebanese Civil War, and the later years of the Cold War, as well as the early years of the War on Terror. She was decommissioned for the last time in 1991, put up for donation hold in 1999, and opened to the public in 2001. In addition to the commissioning ceremony that we'll be holding in a couple of months, which you're all welcome to attend if you find yourself in the Philadelphia Camden area, we also hold overnights for Cub Scouts just about every weekend. We can have about 300 kids at a time. We hold guided tours for school groups. We'll see about 10,000 in an average year. We're open for self-guided visitation 7 days a week. If you just show up off the street, you can walk through the tours, more than 1.5 miles of tour routes at your own leisure. And we do catered events on board, such as weddings, board meetings, and things like that.
You can, of course, also always find us on YouTube at Battleship New Jersey.
My question is, you've been traveling a lot recently. Which of the battleships that you've seen has been your favorite?
I got an easy answer for this. I love Battleship Texas just because she is so different than the rest of the ship. She's very different from us. She's a World War I. She is very unique. She's not currently open. Check them out online for now. But I love Battleship Texas.
I'm a big fan of Battleship North Carolina. Unlike New Jersey, which now looks like she would have in roughly 1990 in the Gulf War era, Battleship North Carolina is still in her original World War II configuration. So as I'm going around that ship, I can imagine what this ship would have looked like 80 years ago.
For everyone's reference, there are 8 museum battleships in the United States, spread out all along the coasts. So find out who's closest to you and definitely go check them out.
Yeah, here in Fredericksburg, Texas, we don't quite have any water to carry a battleship. But if you are new here, we are located in Fredericksburg. Who would think a Pacific War museum in Texas would make much sense? But here we are, and it's all because of Admiral Nimitz. He was actually born just a couple blocks down the road from where we're located at, and we decided to kind of honor those men that fought in the Pacific War here in Fredericksburg. So short and sweet. So again, thank you, Libby. Thank you, Ryan, for being here with us today. I think we learned quite a lot of information about the Rosies and more information about the Battleship New Jersey. We hope everyone has learned a little bit something. Thank you again to our speakers, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. We hope you have a great rest of your day.